sugar, so this is going to be a fast 30 minutes. What a great day it's been, right? To be among so many people learning about so many people who are striving to create communities where every gift finds a place and where everyone belongs and where everyone serves. So it's been a wonderful day in that sense. And I'm starting to feel kind of inspired by the setting. Here we are at a seminary. So I decided to wrap this up. I'm going to preach. Is that okay? Yeah, and I'm going to preach from a book from something you don't often hear preached from. I'm going to preach from Numbers. Is that okay? No, I mean, like literally, I'm going to preach from numerals, numbers, right? I'm a researcher after all, right? I want to talk about numbers that highlight an incredible opportunity for communities of faith to help their members flourish in faith and in life. I'm going to talk about numbers that I hope become a catalyst for you as congregations to think more broadly about what it means to be in community with one another. And I'm going to share some numbers with you that remind us that far too often people with disabilities are on the margins of community life. But there are things we can do to change that landscape, but we have to be intentional. And I think that a lot of times our conversations about disability and ministry and special needs ministry so much focus on the efforts we make to welcome and weave people with disabilities into our worship, into our religious education, into other activities that take place really within the walls of the congregation. And I think those are really important conversations because God's call on our congregations to be, and us to be places of hospitality and welcome, those haven't really always been received. And so we've got to be certainly intentional about making sure we're accessible so that everyone can get in, right? We're all on the same page on that. But I find myself just as concerned about our ability to get out. Our ability to at least get out together from the walls of the congregation. Because I think that a faith community that focuses too narrowly on what happens within the walls of the building, that may be an integrated congregation, but I wonder still if we're fully realizing what it means to be an inclusive community. And so we're going to turn our attention to what happens beyond the walls of the congregation. And this, as you see, is a beautiful congregational door. To illustrate our going out, but it also is completely inaccessible, so a bad image to put up there for you. But I want you to think about what is it that happens after the benediction and the ways we might live life together the other 6 days of the week. What would it look like to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families to flourish really beyond the walls of our congregations? And to set the stage for that, I want to share with you 5 points that I think you're going to find have really strong research support, and probably pretty strong theological support. So whichever resonates with you. Here we go. And the first is this. I have found in my research, through combing scores and scores of data, that the average week has 7 days in it. It's true. On average, that's the case. And I've confirmed this by checking all of your local calendars. To a T, there are 7 days in a week. And I also went back to Genesis, and it's true there too. There's 7 in a week, right? What's my point of this really ridiculous reflection? It's really to punctuate, I think, what's an important point. Because if we think about how much of our efforts to foster connections and shared lives are limited to when we gather for worship on a Sunday morning or a Friday night or a Saturday, and then we think about how much of our lives are actually lived beyond those 2 or 3 hours of the week, we see a really missed opportunity. Unless you are a clergy, 98% of your time, 165 hours, happen outside of the walls of our congregation. This is not a call for you to take your eyes off on what happens for those 2 or 3 hours, but to think beyond Sunday morning, to think bigger and in different ways. And that might be a new conversation as we think about disability and ministry. So that's the first point. And here's my graphic to prove how much time you spend outside of the week. Second point, throughout those 6 days, people with disabilities are present in every neighborhood, every community, every county across our country. They may not have a presence in our faith communities, but they have a presence certainly in our broader communities. I made that point this morning, so I won't elaborate on that, but I think that's an important thing. And point 3 is that houses of worship have a ubiquitous presence in communities across the country. My understanding is you have at least a few churches here in Fort Worth area, at least a couple, right? So there are actually 335,000 congregations across the country. Isn't that staggering? I thought most of them were in Nashville, Tennessee, but it turns out 27,848 of them are here in Texas. And if you don't believe me, up on your screen is all the dots that represent the congregations in this community. So I put this up, begin to think about what's the impact that collectively we can have as congregations throughout those other 6 days. So if you don't see your church up there, again, contact Google. Right? There are congregations everywhere. Fourth, I think most communities would affirm the importance of helping their members to flourish in all aspects of life, spiritually, vocationally, educationally, relationally. And so what is it that helps people with disabilities to flourish? And of course, you've heard throughout the day, the way you find that out is you ask people. And you anticipate that their answers are going to sound very similar to the ways you would answer that question. A meaningful job, a safe place to live, something to do, a best friend, a place to belong, a chance to contribute, a family who loves them. These are the things that help us flourish. And whether or not someone has a disability is not a good predictor of what people want for their lives or what helps them thrive. And so those distinctions about disability and what's important really aren't very helpful at this point. So really we're about helping people with flourish if we're part of our faith communities. And that looks all different sorts of ways, relationally, families, and others. And this leads to my fifth point, and I think it's become part of our vernacular to talk about special needs ministries. And as I think about what it is that really helps people flourish, I question whether really what we're doing is trying to meet special needs. In fact, I think the most pressing needs are not really special or unique to people with disabilities. In fact, they're quite ordinary. They're quite universal needs. Now, it's not a critique of our language of special needs, but a challenge for us to think differently about what we're really trying to do. So is special needs really the way to think about this? Because a meaningful job and a safe and comfortable place to live, something to do, a best friend, a place to belong, a chance to contribute, a family to love them, these are the same things that contribute to our own flourishing. And they strike me as things that are sometimes really difficult to address only on an occasional Sunday morning. So I really like the name of actually this ministry. It says Human Needs Ministry, because I actually think that's what we're really investing in. And of course, this ministry, I don't know what it's really about. It has nothing to do with our conversation today. But it caused me to think about how do we really think about what we're investing in? And why might it be helpful to really think about us meeting ordinary felt needs in our community rather than ones that are special or unique? Maybe this kind of perspective helps us see our fellow congregation members and neighbors with developmental disabilities in terms of what we all share in common, these universal aspirations, rather than what sort of distinguishes us by the categories we're kind of fit in. Or maybe it would really help us to think about that we actually already know what we need to know to meet people's needs and help them live enviable lives. That a prerequisite for doing disability ministry is not having expertise in special education or behavior analysis or holding some particular degree, but rather thinking about the things people do in your life that help you flourish and doing those things for people with disabilities. And maybe this kind of perspective would help us see that maybe a program is not always our first response when we think about supporting people with disabilities and their families. Not that programs are not important, but ultimately it's about helping people live good lives one person at a time. So maybe that's a way to think about this. So what would it look like for congregations to play a role in helping to meet the needs and support flourishing of people with disabilities and this segment of their community? I want to encourage you really, as we sort of close out the day, to very prayerfully consider what your individual congregation might do or what collectively congregations in the Fort Worth area might do in 4 kinds of areas. How do we help people find a meaningful job? How do we help people with disabilities have a good place to live, a good, safe, comfortable place to live? How can we help people with disabilities have friends they can count on, the thing you were talking about earlier, the most important thing? And how can we make sure our families are well supported, especially families that are getting older and are aging? How do we come alongside them and their older sons and daughters with intellectual and developmental disabilities? Huge opportunities. We could talk about a lot of other opportunities as well. And I don't want to put these up or talk about these to have them be prescriptive. I'm not saying go do all these things. I'm trying to just illustrate possibilities and get you thinking about how you might have an impact and put yourself really in a position to be impacted as well. So let's start with the world of work. We know that when people with developmental disabilities are connected to meaningful jobs in their communities, achieving all the other goals that are important become that much easier. Because that's true for all of us, right? A good job is not just about financial well-being. Think about what else comes from it. A sense of accomplishment, self-worth, independence, a place to share our gifts and our in valued ways, new friendships that we develop, a chance to be connected to our community, and maybe a context to live out our particular calling. All those come from a job. And the right job is a vocation. The wrong job or no job is kind of like a sentence. And so I think there's some opportunities for here to have an impact in the lives of people with disabilities. And I think congregations actually have everything they need to do, or know everything they need to know to make this happen. So you think about the first question that you almost inevitably ask someone when you first meet them, kind of what's your name, and then what's the next question you typically ask? What do you do, right? What do you do? Or actually in Fort Worth, where do you go to church maybe? And then what do you do, possibly? It's a hard question for people with developmental disabilities to answer. Almost every single metric we have points to the elusiveness of employment for people with disabilities. Those are missed chances for people with disabilities to share their gifts and their talents in the workplace. But it also means we've got lots of employers and people in our community who never have a chance to see people with disabilities in terms of their gifts and contributions. And the numbers are staggering. 75% of people with cognitive disabilities in Texas are unemployed. That's the unemployment rate. 75%. It's actually as high as 90% for people with intellectual disabilities. 1 out of 20 are served in integrated employment. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities is double what that is for people without disabilities. And 6 years even after leaving high school, less than half of young people with autism have had any job at all at any point in those 6 years. So I think here, those are numbers that are really disappointing, and the service system has really struggled to address those numbers. We've seen almost no change in employment outcomes for the last couple decades. It hasn't changed. So you start to see kind of some missed opportunities here. Members of our community are missing out on the opportunities to work alongside their neighbors with disabilities and to see them for their gifts and talents. So I'm pretty convinced that we have to both work within the service system to solve this, but also beyond the service system. Those have to happen together if we're going to change the employment landscape. So I think here's a place where faith communities have a real opportunity for people with disabilities to really connect them to chances to share their gifts and vocation. That investment builds on what we know about scriptural understandings about the dignity of work, the stewardship of one's talents and gifts, and the responsibilities of our community to support those who are on the margin. And we can get to know people in our faith communities in ways that a broken service system never can, to understand people in terms of their gifts and sense of calling in ways that service systems often aren't primed to think, and to do that from a different motivation. So we have a project called Putting Faith to Work right now, and what do you think I mean by this idea that you have the capacity already to do this? Well, it turns out that faith communities are probably the most extensive network of employers in any community, right? The average size congregation has about 186 attenders, and if you consider then the number of employers who are even in a small congregation, there's incredible opportunities. So who is your congregation filled with? Right? It's filled with employers and employees, people who are connected to organizations and businesses in every corner of your community, and who may already kind of be inclined to sort of help one of their own who's part of the congregation. And the gift that they have that they've never really thought about maybe to share with people with disabilities is all of their connections in the broader community. And many of the jobs that many of these jobs are ones that job developers working within state-supported agencies are maybe unlikely to know about. So what you find is any congregation are people who are connected all throughout our community in places that where the job opportunities are. And so when you start to take time and discover, wow, that we've got a young woman with a disability, for example, who really would love to work at a dental office, and then you start to discover, wow, there's at least 5 people in our congregation who work in these kinds of places. How can we tap into those connections to find a place for her passions and her gifts? It's a different way of thinking about who gathers on Sunday morning, for example. But it's also an association of people who are frankly connected to lots of other people. And it's through personal connections that most of us get our jobs. That's how most of us get our jobs, is through those personal connections. Now, social scientists tell us that the average person has a network of 150 people. 150 people. Now, social scientists don't have a network of 150 people because people don't want to be friends with social scientists because they show numbers. But the average person does, right? So think about each person in your congregation knows 150 other people, and you start to think of the connections that are there. And so you start to say, if I get to know someone's aspirations and their strengths related to a particular area of work, I can start asking people in my congregation, who do you know who knows someone who does this? And that's how opportunities start to come up. You're a congregation filled with people who are part of associations that are connected with other people in their community. And that's how jobs start to happen. And the same sort of capacity exists when it comes to supporting someone to make that connection to a job. Think about the talents and the experiences that exist in your congregation that are there, that are exactly what someone needs to make an employment connection. People who know how to write resumes, who know how to practice for interviews, who can give you a ride to an interview, who can be an encouragement, who can pray for you, who knows what it's like to be out of work and can walk alongside you. Our churches are filled with people who have gifts to share, and they've never thought about these as being exactly the thing that someone else needs to get to work. They never realize that these are gifts in need of receipt. And these are associations and connections that can be drawn on for other things, most important, social connections and friendships. I'll come back to that a little later. So what could happen to the employment landscape if the congregations in this community right here were intentional in this area? Not for dozens or scores of people, but for one person in your community, or two, or three who are already part of your congregation. What would that look like? Well, here's some things congregations are doing right now. Clergy are inviting their members and encouraging the members to be advocates within their own workplaces for the hiring of people with disabilities, or they're promoting Disability Employment Awareness Month within their congregation because it's filled with 186 different employers. Even better, I'd love to see us model the commitment in our churches to actually hire people with disabilities. What if those 28,000 churches in this state committed to hiring one person with a disability? And then add to that all the church-sponsored nursing homes, child care centers, hospitals, schools, community ministries. We could change the unemployment rates simply if we, as faith communities, made that commitment. Or maybe your congregation on its own or in partnership with others could support people with disabilities in your already existing employment-related initiatives. Some churches have job clubs, or they do jobs for life, things that really help connect their members to jobs, but they haven't thought about including people with disabilities in those efforts. Or maybe you could start some new initiative in your congregation that simply involves a group of people walking alongside someone with a disability on the pathway to employment. That's what our Putting Faith to Work project is. It's a way that a circle of support comes around people with disabilities, gets to know them one at a time, and says, now, who do we know in this congregation who could use exactly those gifts in the workplace? But you don't discover those unless you're really involved in someone's life. So I think there's great opportunities here for congregations, and I really think we could change the employment landscape if we invested in these areas. When we ask families about this kind of support, certainly not every person with a disability or family is going to want to turn to their faith community for these sorts of connections, but a lot of them will. In Tennessee, as part of a large study that we did last year that involved 2,400 families, 64% of parents said, I'd be somewhat or very likely to turn to my congregation for help around this issue if they'd be willing to offer it. So here's a great opportunity for all of you. If you want to know more about the Putting Faith to Work project, to read more about efforts to articulate a commitment to this in your congregation, I'd encourage you to visit our Putting Faith to Work website. There are also groups that are really here in Tennessee. Here in Texas, there's a branch of our Putting Faith to Work project that is looking for congregations that want to partner in this area, and I can hook you up with them as well. So that's the first area, but having a safe and comfortable place to live, not just in the community, but in community, is another aspect of thriving, and a place I think where congregations are also making a difference. You know, nationally at least, our legislation and policies are reflecting a commitment to helping people move out of institutional and congregate residential programs into the sort of living situations that reflect the diverse ways anyone lives in a community. Not because this is just good for people with developmental disabilities, but because it means essential gifts right now are missing from our communities, and people are missing opportunities to live alongside people with disabilities. But I think the service system is way beyond its capacity right now to help this transition happen. The numbers in Texas are pretty big. 8,000 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in segregated residential settings, 4,400 in intermediate care facilities. The challenge here is finding the people and the places and the pathways for supporting people to move more into typical living situations. So what does it look like to support people to live well in community, to support people with disabilities who are living with their families in community, or people who are living in independent living situations, to really feel part of a community and not just be located in a community? So here's some more opportunities for people of faith. What could it look like to make an effort here? Well, one thing you could do is you probably already, some congregations at least already offer supported living programs or small group homes. These are faith-based endeavors that ensure people with disabilities can have the option of living in contexts that will support their faith commitments and religious traditions. That's one opportunity. There are also networks of congregations within some cities that are banding together and forming intentional communities that are designed to have people with and without disabilities live together in these sort of intentional communities. There are examples of that even here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There are also congregations right now that are already doing great things to meet the needs of immigrants, single parents, people who are returning from correctional settings, people who are impacted by poverty. They offer housing assistance, repair assistance, furnishings, all those sorts of things. Those can be great for people with disabilities as well. And I think a fourth way is for congregations to really become allies and advocates for accessible and affordable and inclusive housing options in their community. You can partner with housing coalitions to kind of identify residential needs and explore avenues for really being a voice of change. And finally, one thing that I want to raise here, especially because we're at a seminary, is I'd love to see faith communities think outside of the box on these issues. You know, some of you might be familiar with an idea of a program called the Friendship House. It's happening at Western Theological Seminary. It's happening at Duke Seminary. It's about to happen at Vanderbilt Divinity School. These are residence halls that are built to have seminarians and people with intellectual disabilities live together in community. It gives young people with disabilities a chance to live independently. It gives seminarians a chance to live in community with people with disabilities. It helps meet a housing need, but it does something way bigger than that. It changes fundamentally the congregations, the future congregations that these seminarians will be leading. Can you imagine the impact here on those seminarians and the leadership they'll provide because they had that opportunity to live life together? So could we advocate for that kind of shared housing here at a place like this seminary, or at Baylor, or at Perkins, or elsewhere? Great opportunities there. Now, just to come back to something you shared earlier, a good job and a place to live are important, but it's relationships that are at the heart of what makes community rich and brings fulfillment to our lives. Having someone somewhere that we belong, having someone who remembers our birthday, having someone who invites us out for a cookout or the Super Bowl, someone who notices when we're not there, someone to love, someone who loves us back. We're created to be in relationships. And friendships rarely receive attention within the service system. There's no law that can make us be friends. The one thing I think we can do to have the greatest impact on flourishing is to create opportunities through our congregations for people with and without developmental disabilities to meet one another, to get involved in each other's lives, and to perhaps, through that, develop the gift of friendship. And there are three great things about this very simple gesture. The first is it takes no training to do it. You don't have to have any expertise. Second, it requires no new programs and no funding. And third, you might just be surprised to learn out who are really the beneficiaries of doing this. And if you're not sure why this is so important, I want you to think about just how isolated some people with intellectual disabilities are in our community. If you think about your own relationships, I mentioned this last night, all of us have people in our lives who are family members. We have those people who are our close friends and close companions. We have people that we just spend time with, they're our acquaintances, and we have those people who are paid to be in our lives. And we all have people in all of those circles. That inner circle sticks really close. That outer circle comes and goes. And for so many people with developmental disabilities, all of their relationships fall in those two circles. The power we have as congregations is to fill in those two inner circles with people who are there because they want to be there and because they love spending time with Sam or John or Allison or whoever. There's an opportunity here for congregations that is so incredible. And I share that because the numbers here are striking. 46% of young people with autism have no friends. None at all. 52% of young people with autism don't see friends at least weekly. 42% of people with intellectual disability fit that description. So, you don't need a study to tell you this, but loneliness hurts. And that's one thing that we as communities have a real power to have an impact on. And so if you're not sure how to foster friendships, boy, well, there's no recipe here. It's actually not hard, though. There's kind of 4 key ingredients. Shared activities, got to do stuff together. Shared activities built around common interests, giving people valued roles, and doing that over time so people have regular opportunities to connect with one another. And the great thing is that every congregation is filled with people who have interests, hobbies, passions, and rich community connections. And it's through those connections that relationships get formed. So all you do is you spend time with a person and you say, what does this person with a disability love to do, love to talk about, love to spend time around? And can we find other people in our congregation who have exactly those same passions? And I bet you will not struggle to find it if you make connections on that basis. I mentioned a story last night about a congregation that was contacted by a local group home with 4 individuals with developmental disabilities who were looking for a congregation to be part of. And the pastor made an announcement essentially saying to the congregation at the morning worship, a few men with intellectual disabilities from a group home are going to be joining our community. We want them to feel welcome. If you'd like to be part of a small group that steps into their lives and gets to know them, come down after the service and talk to me, and I'll tell you about the opportunity. Guess how many men came down after the service? 0. No one came down. So I went to the local group home, found out a little bit about the men, gave the pastor a different announcement. Here's what he said. All right, men, we've got some men in our local community. We've got an opportunity for you that's come up from our local community. If you in this congregation are a die-hard Green Bay Packers fan, and you love to get together on Monday night and watch football and eat junk food and drink beer and get together with the guys, come down after the service. We've got an opportunity for you. We'll tell you more about it. Guess how many men came down after the service? 54 men came down after the service, right? Then the opportunity was, hey guys, we know some men in our community, they're diehard Green Bay Packers fans. They've got no one to watch the game with. Does that sound like something you could spend time doing? The men are like, absolutely. Why? The connection is based on shared interest, common interest, not on needing any expertise around disability. So connect perseverations. People with autism have perseverations. Other people have passions, right? Connect perseverations with passions. Find out what someone loves to do, to talk about what they'd like to be around, and then look for others who share that in common. And I think that that's where you'll have real opportunities to have an impact in your congregation. A few things you can do to make that happen: commit to inclusive programming in all aspects of what you do in congregational life. Make sure there are chances for people to meet with one another when they come into the walls of your congregation. Second, remember that relationships form over time. So encourage people to just do simple things like share a meal, catch a movie, grab a cup of coffee, head to the mall, come over to the house to watch a Cowboys game. All of those things are the really simple things that people need most. And third, reach out to local group homes and supported living programs. We saw examples of that on the panels this morning. Let them know about social events that you're doing and invite them to come along. And fourth, I'd encourage you to consider establishing circles of support around particular individuals with disabilities in an effort to kind of create a durable relationship network for them. And I think there's also opportunities for you to think about groups like Friendship Ministries, Young Life Capernaum, and others that are intentional ways of connecting people with and without disabilities. And last, and with almost no time, I want to just turn to families. And I talked about families this morning, so I'm not going to say a lot more about this now, except that families have no lukewarm stories about congregations. They're either talk about the welcome that they've received, or they talk about leaving wounded. And so when you can come alongside these families, you can have a powerful impact on them the other 6 days of the week. And particularly as families are aging and their children are aging, it becomes so critical not to overlook the families of older individuals with disabilities. We focus so much on young people with disabilities. If you're not sure what supports are going to make a real difference and you need a starting point, you'll remember earlier today I showed you bunch of examples of the kinds of things that families said that might be helpful for them from their congregation. These are just some ideas, but like we heard from some of the comments earlier, you don't know what people want until you shouldn't assume what people want. You should find out by asking them and then do those sorts of things. But things like respite are huge opportunities for congregations to step in on. Only 8% of congregations are even doing that. So what does that look like in your congregation? I'm not going to put up more ridiculous graphics. I think you kind of get the idea here. And if you're wanting to know more about how to do that, read the guide that we shared with you. It's free. It offers very practical advice on how to do these. But you start one family at a time, you start one person at a time, and you start to think about, how do I help this individual thrive? And how do we as a congregation already have all we need in our community to make that happen? Now, a whirlwind of ideas, primarily to spur your own creativity. I hope you'll leave very prayerfully trying to discern what your next steps are in all the areas you've heard about today. And let me just kind of close with 3 very short points. The first is that know that your congregation already has the connections and the creativity and the care to undertake any of the efforts you've heard today. The only needed expertise, I think, really is intentionality and a commitment and some time. And second, there are a disability service system is out there. It's not perfect, but they can be allies and supports for you as you undertake this journey. You do not have to go this alone. There's other congregations, there's service systems that would love to support you in helping people with disabilities to flourish. And I think the third point is really to just think one person at a time. Our tendency is to start programs, but really what we need to do is invest in relationships. That's how we have the biggest impact, I think, on the lives of people with disabilities. So to take you back to our starting point, I think a truly welcoming congregation welcomes all 7 days of the week. And our efforts to weave people into community life have to stretch beyond the walls of our buildings, into our neighborhoods, into our workplaces, into our homes, really, I think, into our very lives. So I am so thrilled that you invested the whole day here, even amidst lots of charts and numbers. And I just want to thank you for investing in this area, for your heart for this work, and for your willingness to attend this really compelling event. And I pray that the next steps you take will be fruitful and you can go forward with confidence. Thank you so much for your time. Good.